So the first panel looks at the role of manufacturing in defence and sets the scene for the discussion today. And we welcome to the stage John Ridge, Chief Adoption Officer at the NATO Innovation Fund, Sille Pettai, CEO of SmartCap from Estonia, and Nataliia Kushnerska, CEO of Brave One from Ukraine, and Liz Young-McNally from the DIU.
Thanks so much to all of you for being here for this important conversation this afternoon. We're delighted to have all of you. And thanks as well to Glenn and Resilience Media for putting this on. In this first panel, we're really going to help set the stage and the scene for all the conversations to follow. And I thought I'd start by having each of my fellow co-panelists here maybe tell me a little bit about your organization, the origin story, and the role your organization is playing in continuing to revitalize manufacturing and defense innovation, both in your country and in the alliance more broadly. Nataliia, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. Good afternoon to everyone. Good to see you here, and thank you for having me here. So I'm representing Brave One. I'm CEO of Brave One. We've launched our defense tech cluster 2 years ago. We are a state project and state cluster. Our main idea and our main focus was actually to bring innovations during the wartime to the front line as soon as it's possible. Within our country, we did really huge deregulation procedures and opening the doors and fast tracks for developing innovations. Within Brave One, we have special grant programs, and we've granted already around 500 companies with the grants, and we see how important that is. We do help the companies with the codification, with the testings, with the delivering them to the front line. Now we know what is actually needed on the front line, and we can and we do actually think in innovative way and what's next to come in the innovations. We know what are our big gaps within technologies we need on the front line. We have very tight connections with their soldiers from the front line with different types of defense forces. And definitely we are open to bring more technologies coming from our allies countries to Ukraine. We are definitely open to bring, and we do a lot of matchmaking between investors and the companies, between integration of the companies, and within our Brave One capacities, we see how important and how potential we are within integrating technologies within one product. We do a lot of R&D by hands. We know who has good hardware, who has good communication mean, who has good AI solution. We put it all together, and then we see how fast we can adopt it to the front line. A last thing that in 2 years within our platform, we know about 4,000 different solutions. We're working with more than 1,400 different companies, making a lot of different defense technologies. We're working only with defense technologies, and we see how fast we're growing. For example, one of the things that we have had no robotic systems, now ground vehicles, unmanned ground vehicles. Now we have more than 40 codified, and we see with the numbers how fast they're appearing on the front line and contracting them. We have the same results with the AI. For you just to understand, for example, with UAVs, we have more than 300 companies making different types of UAVs. And definitely you know from the news how fast we are in adopting and sending them with different missions, with different surprises for the Russians, and different good results for us. So we definitely believe in technologies. We definitely know that all about unmanned system, that is not our future, but these are our realities nowadays, and we're more than open and welcome to bring more global technologies to Ukraine and to send all of them to our enemy, to Russia, and to test it in Moscow. Thank you.
Okay. I'm Sille from SmartCap, and SmartCap is Estonian state-owned investment fund. We have been investing since 2008 in different technologies. We have different investment strategies. We make both direct investments and fund investments to create and develop the capital market, but also address address the need of capital for those companies where the private investors are a bit risk adverse or they just lack the capacity to invest in. And as the sort of the latest addition to our portfolio, we launched just recently in January, we launched the defense fund dedicated to defense technologies in Estonia. And the reason being that we really don't have a defense industry, as you all know it from US or Europe, where you have defense primes, established defense companies operating, or just take Russia. They know what defense industry is, and we can come back to that. But we need to start from somewhere. We are starting, and soon I'll tell you more what we're building on.
Very nice to be here. Thank you very much, Steve, for the invitation. My name's John Ridge. I'm the Chief Adoption Officer in the NATO Innovation Fund. The NATO Innovation Fund was born out of an initiative in NATO called NATO 2030, and it created two organisations, Diana, Defence Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic, and the NATO Innovation Fund. And Diana does the acceleration of particularly early stage startups, and the NIF is effectively NATO's CVC, for want of a better expression. So they put capital into these startups. To give you a rough idea of how we work, we are funded by 24 of the 32 NATO nations, who are our limited partners. They've committed a total of €1 billion over 15 years. And we invest that into anywhere between sort of seed through to about Series B. Check size of anything from about €1 million up to about €15 million, so a significant amount of investments. We also, like you, make fund investments with the idea that we start to build the capacity in the civilian markets for starting to put money into dual-use companies. We focus on deep tech against the 9 emerging disruptive technologies that NATO has articulated. And the idea is that we're investing in what we're describing as defence, security and resilience. So manufacturing is incredibly important. To bring that to life, we have 3 of our portfolio companies directly locked into supply chains. So Icomat is a composites manufacturing company who produce novel carbon fibre manufacturing. We're working to get them locked into the supply chains for existing defence industries, and obviously there's a massive dual-use market in aerospace, automotive, etc. So that's one example. There's another one called Fractile, which is a very low TRL novel compute company generating novel silicon to do inference models, to run inference models for AI. So very low TRL, but a critical thing in terms of starting to build the silicon capacities that we're going to need in our supply chains. And then the final one, which is a little bit out there, is SpaceForge, who are going to make silicon chips in space. So we've kind of got everything from traditional manufacturing right through to that really high-end thing. So we're already in that game of being part of manufacturing. We can come on to it later, but it feels to me exactly, the reason for this conference is abundantly clear, because you start your war with your arsenal that you've got, but you win it with your manufacturing base.
Thanks so much. And I mean, what a great mix of perspectives here. And I think it shows all of the innovation and commitment that's really starting across many different parts of Europe on this topic. And John, I couldn't agree more. If we sort of start from there, and Sille, you mentioned this a little bit as you sort of referenced Russia's manufacturing base as well. But if we were to fast forward and come back 5 years from now, where would you like to see Europe in terms of defense manufacturing and capability? You know, what are sort of your wishes in terms of what that would look like 5 years from now?
Yes, I mentioned Russia, and I make a little like a historical tour, and I think it's important to understand the context, because the choices we're making today need to be relevant and valid and justify themselves in 5 and 10 years. So I go back to 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea, and we wanted so bad for Russia to be weak. But what happened in 2014, Putin urged oligarchs and Russian industrial companies to sell their non-core assets, basically exit from everything in the West, bring back money home, And what it resulted in, what you could effectively see was that Russian industrial companies got cash on their balance sheets, and Putin urged them to create reserves. There were different excuses and reasons. Of course, ruble was suffering, the economy was suffering, but he sent so strong signal to industrial companies and the oligarchs to sell Western assets, bring money home, that their balance sheets became so strong during 2014 and 2020 to actually enter to the area where we are currently. And another thing he did in 2014 and all the way to 2022, he rolled out massive support programs for industrial companies to modernize production, and not just defense industry, but also the whole supply chain from steel mills and critical materials to manufacturing of machinery. There were grants for innovation, there were tax incentives, there were subsidies to loans. So what the industrial companies did, they actually modernized their production. So in 2022, they were really well geared for the war. And that's what we see now. We really want to see them weak, but they might not be. They were quite well prepared. And that's the industry we're facing on the border of Russia. We can't build a defense industry like that in Estonia. Now we look at the Western Europe, there are defense primes, established defense companies that are building expensive, often, they're innovating, but still legacy solutions. We can't replicate that. The question is, what are we going to do? And what we're planning to do is what we did back in the 90s when we had a blank page. But we had a lot of ambition and courage when we created our e-government, that digital solution, the digital society, everything digital from scratch. And that basically created a whole generation of tech entrepreneurs, our tech success stories, very successful tech companies from Skype to Pipedrive and TransferWise. And based on these Skype engineers and entrepreneurs, we have been able to build the next generation of tech entrepreneurs. And that's the sort of the talent and material we have with. We need to work what we have and build on our strengths. So basically what we're trying to do is build our defense industry on our strengths and the talent that we have, the tech talent. And because it has very strong roots in software, most likely what we're going to see and do today and see in 5 years will be software defined, AI enabled, less steel. We don't have steel mills, so less steel, more software, more AI, more money, like physically cheaper solutions, cheap and more of these software.
Just picking up on that, I mean, the three characteristics that it feels to me that we're going to have. One is around sovereignty. So we saw the impact of COVID-19 on supply chains. We saw how quickly manufacturing industries were hobbled by not being able to get particular parts. So we need sovereignty inside Europe. I think we need redundancy as well. And again, the example of Ukraine is the way that they've spread their manufacturing out. They've distributed manufacturing, particularly of the drones as well, so they're not consolidated in single factories. Because if you have everything in one factory and that factory gets hit, you lose a lot. So something around that kind of distribution and that redundancy. And then the final bit is it needs to support innovation, and that means it needs to be agile, so you can switch between different products, and you need to make it scalable. So you need to be able to move up your production quantities up and down. The bit that's missing for me, much of that already exists, the bit that's missing from a defence perspective is then having the business model that allows you to harness that. And I'd love to come back later to how we build that business model, because at the moment, that's the piece, the crucial bit that's missing. But instinctively, what does that actually look like? I think that looks like lots and lots of additive manufacturing. And I think it means lots and lots of open architectures and the ability to swap in and out modular parts. that we're not there yet because, exactly as has been said before, our systems are configured for, let's buy this thing in 10 years' time, let's have a single provider doing it all. We're not going to win the war with that, I'm afraid.
If possible, I would add as well from my side, because I remember our first conference in Tallinn 2 years ago, and we were speaking about defense tech, and it was not agreed that the people might think, and they have to think about defense tech. Technologies and IT, for years, last year, there were very sexy things, but were not assumed by the Europe that is like the thing that is needed to be overthinked. And today, I think that totally agree with John. First of all, we need to build our sovereignty within our technologies and manufacturing and capacities. And second thing, just look, the war in Ukraine shows us that we are not ready for the war. All our manufacturing is scaled up only to refill the stocks. All our innovation, they are far away from the real needs and from the real number of the things. And within the war only in Ukraine, again, all Europe is not ready to deliver the number of the things needed within front line. And again, the time has changed. Now all of us is living in threat, and we really living under threat. And I think that for all of us, there is totally time to overthink, first of all, the role of technologies, definitely to go to the defense technologies, and definitely to think how we will provide enough scaling up of the manufacturing to be sure that in the case of their major scaled war, we will be able to defend ourselves and to fight, because today we don't have enough.
No, and I think I totally agree that both COVID-19 and what happened there, as well as the war in Ukraine, is certainly a call to action, and we're seeing, the fruits of that starting to come on. Before I go back, John, to your point on the business models that I wanted to touch on as well, I want to just ask Nataliia a little bit more. Within Ukraine, how do you think about manufacturing capacity? It's not necessarily easy to know, which manufacturing do you use here, there, a warehouse. I'm just curious how the country is making those trade-offs.
So first of all, one of the things that we need to overthink and to understand that not everybody needs their own manufacturing. And still we have very great Israel model when we have a lot of R&D teams and we have big manufacturing who are providing the manufacturing procedures. What is going on? Very same things in Ukraine. We have some R&D teams and they go to manufacture to the big companies. We have big manufacturing companies who are just taking R&Ds for the producing. We see how, again, engineering team like making small redesigns so it would be scalable. So, and again, what we see that it's very necessary to open the market and to open the companies and people to connect themselves. Because again, we don't need to do everything, as John told, in one place. We don't need to do everything in one factory. That is great that one of them is making like only 3D printing. And I think that as well, 3D printing, that is one of the surprises for this war as well, how it's possible to do a lot of things with 3D printing. That is very fast, very cheap, and very efficient. So we see how fast, again, we just connecting, like you're doing engines, you're doing like communication means, we are doing hardware, so that's okay, integrated all together, and it's sent to Moscow. So that is like the thing that, on one hand, yes, there are big companies who are growing, and that's okay that they have enough money, enough experience, enough teams to do their own manufacturing. On the other hand, small teams, it's okay that they made their perfect R&D, they are caught up by state or by private, again, enterprises to do their manufacturing, to do outsourcing for them, and then just to send it.
Thank you. If we bring it back now to that company level, and John, you touched on business model. We have a number of startups here and investors that work with startups. What advice would you give to them as they start out? Especially those that have the ability to really be thinking about what is their manufacturing strategy going to be. It's obviously different for companies that are already around and rethinking that. I'm just curious what advice you would give to a startup as they consider their manufacturing approach.
Yeah, so I suppose one of their key decisions for a dual-use company is the amount of effort you're going to focus on your civilian market and your defence market. And it's a really tough decision because you're effectively running, you might be running two slightly different supply chains. You're definitely running two routes to market, and that requires you to make a really deliberate decision around what you're doing, because doing both of them badly is not going to work. So I would say it wouldn't I? I'd love them to focus on the defence market and therefore kind of double down on that. And I'm hopeful that the sort of reforms I'm seeing makes that a really profitable business to be in. And that's why the NIF exists, because we kind of believe in that. I think the bits around the supply chain for them is you have to think right from the outset around things like protect and security. So think about where your components are coming from. And we know that if you look at our traditional primes, as you back through their supply chain, quite quickly you can lose contact with where those components are coming from. And if we take, for example, the drones, quadcopters flying in Ukraine at the moment, it's extremely difficult to source cheap electric motors for those outside China. And that brings a set of vulnerabilities which we might not want to have in there. So I think thinking deliberately around where you're building your supply chains, and that becomes a quality which you can then use to make yourself competitive. Because if we're talking to companies and they say, hey, we know exactly where our components come from, we know that they're sovereign, and we know that we're building a European supply chain, that is a massive bonus for us as an investor, because not only does it provide that security of supply chain that we were talking about earlier, but it also gives us the confidence that we're contributing to capacity building as well. So for me, if you're going to do one thing, it's really focus on where that stuff's coming from, and if you can, try and reinforce European supply chains.
Just want to add one idea just for you to think. Just imagine we want to, for example, supply, just an idea, 5,000 robotic systems to the front line. For these 5,000 robotics, we need 30,000 wheels. How many factories globally within our elite companies, and for how fast they will be able to produce those wheels? That is the thing that, again, we need just to be set up, all of us, all together.
So I totally agree on the components. I mean, I think the other thing, and you all touched on a little bit, is the sort of future of manufacturing, 3D printing, additive manufacturing, different innovations. So we're not going to just be building here, but we're going to be building differently. What are each of you most excited about in terms of, you know, the opportunities now to manufacturing in new and different ways?
I think the first, that is like how to do really cheap things, really cheap and efficient things in a big numbers, very fast. We don't need something really, and we go again into innovation in their materials. We go into innovation in the manufacturing things. We go into innovation how to build that manufacturing line, how to spread it, how to make calculation, how to use more and more robotic system, how to use more and more AI system and integration in that. I think that again, and one more thing, now we are not thinking mostly how to do more tanks, but we are thinking about how to do more drones. That is the main thing. Whether we need still those big number of the manufacturing, big one and huge one, or again, that is like price efficiency, material efficiency, and what would be the results?
Yeah, just picking up on Natalia's 100% right, and I'm really excited about this because I think it's got the potential to fundamentally disrupt force structures and the stuff we buy, which is really exciting for me as someone who's come out of quite a kind of fossilized system inside defence. And history teaches us a whole load of lessons here. So the Mosquito aircraft that was designed in World War II was designed, it was made of wood, and it was made of wood because you could then put all those component manufacturers out to artisan tradespeople and get them to make the individual components and assemble them later. So you kind of work with the industry base you've got rather than the one you wish you had. So an example there. It was also made multi-role so that you could adapt it to different sorts of missions. So we've been here before, and we get there eventually when we get into a war. My frustration is I'd much rather get there now and start to have the discussions around, okay, what things could we scale once we're actually in the conflict? Therefore, what does our force mixture look like halfway through the conflict? Therefore, how do we then start to build our understanding of how do you move from your existing force structures to those new force structures? And I 100% believe that they're uncrewed, that they're modular, and that they're probably they're definitely lower cost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, a great reference to the history. I like the macaroni factory. A joke, we used to have a macaroni factory in Tallinn, Estonia, that where you could make a slight adjustments to produce bullets. I think those times are over, and all these CNC benches or 3D printing machines you can use for pretty much anything, and that's part of the peacetime business plan and peacetime production as well. You don't need to produce enormous amounts and volumes of drones or other like innovative equipment to your warehouses, but you can roll out the manufacturing really quickly. It can be mobile, often in containers, and bring down the cost. So you don't really need to keep this expensive machinery and production lines waiting for the production or producing all the time. And once you need it, it's outdated. Nobody's going to use the warfare that you produced into the warehouse.
So if I broaden the conversation a little bit, I mean, clearly the three of you here represent not just the investment community, but also the role that governments are playing, you know, whether it's directly in the funds like you're talking about or all the countries that supported NIF. We also have startups, other funders in the room. What other stakeholders do we need to pull into this tent across Europe to really revive manufacturing? You know, who else needs to be part of this conversation, and how do we get them there?
Science. Definitely science, definitely engineering. Again, we see how, again, I believe in matchmaking and in uniting people and cooperation. Because again, when you put like a small business team or big business team and you put them a lot of engineering talent, a lot of science talent and a lot of job, you can be very fast with their results. And again, we see that, and you know from the news, that Ukraine started to do our own missiles within private companies. And just imagine rocket science that is totally rocket science, but again, it's open for the private market, for the private companies. So a little bit of bravery, a little bit of ambitious, a lot of good people, team engineering and science. So, and say, here we go.
Sometimes something we're missing here, a critical part of the puzzle is the customer. Customer and very fragmented and outdated procurement processes that make put to all these innovative companies that we're talking about, the entry barrier extremely high. And what we see not just in defense but in any deep tech companies, the ability to start manufacturing anything about more than 100 units or scaling, and this, it seems like a vicious circle. It's anyway hard to scale the manufacturing, and if the customer is not there or the entry barrier is super high, it's creating extra layer of complications. So now the death valley is not about funding, but there is a manufacturing death valley.
Yeah, so I agree with both of those. Definitely science and academia, and some of the stuff that's coming out of, for instance, in the UK, there's a high-value manufacturing catapult which pulls together industry and academia to see where things like additive manufacturing is going. Definitely agree there, and definitely agree on government. The other three I'd probably add in are venture, you've mentioned already, so how you bring in venture finance. I also think we really need to think about the traditional finance bit, so the banks. So many of our startups really struggle to get banks to support them, and I've spoken to companies who have lost the banks. When they talk about dealing with defense, they get their accounts pulled, which is insane. So we need to deal with them. And then the final bit is industry. So both the existing defense primes and also the sort of broader industrial base that we've got as well. They all need to be involved in that conversation.
You mentioned the banks. Actually, we've been talking to a lot about, with the banks because we can provide funding from seed stage all the way up to growth funding and funding the manufacturing, which means that the leverage is a critical component. And to be honest, at least in the Nordics and looking at the profile of the company is usually working capital, but then you need revenues. But it's not about the exclusions and limitations of weapons and ammunition or defense technologies, but it's about being bankable. It's just that their capital structure is not strong enough, or the financials are not there. The revenue, again, the access to customer and sales, the customer, the procurement is just hurting from so many points. It's not about restrictions and limitations, but the company is not bankable because there's no revenue outlook or forecast.
Can I just follow very quickly on that, because that's really important, and I think there's the need to provide them ways to get non-dilutive funding. So we take equity, and I think you get to a certain point, and for companies quite reasonably, they want to retain the equity that they've got. And the second bit is we have an individual in the NIF who is entirely focused on responsible use. So I think as part of those discussions, the fact that they've been through us, and this is more and more happening, to be able to say we are investing in these things, which in many places are still controversial, but we are absolutely locked into a responsible use policy, so you can have a degree of faith in what we're doing so that we can challenge some of the preconceptions around ESG in particular.
Yeah. No, I agree with all of those, and I think the other piece when we talk about funding in particular is just how capital intensive a lot of this is as well, which makes it challenging. Building on, I think you mentioned the marketplace as well. One thing that we've talked a little bit about that DIU is going to help lead in the US, and maybe there's an opportunity to do something similar in Europe, but is to also create a marketplace so that all of the different startups and scale-ups understand all the different types of advanced manufacturing out there and are able to make those matches. And so we've talked a little bit about that in terms of the Blue Manufacturing Initiative in the US, and we're excited, but I'm sure there's ways we can swap, and something like that could be very useful in Europe as well. I'm getting the look like it's time to wrap up. Maybe rapid fire if any of you have any quick closing thoughts, and then we'll turn it over to the next panel.
Yes, if possible, just two things from me. The first one, I think that there is time for us to understand that defense, it's not about yesterday, and it's not about something cosmic and something very distant. And second thing, that it's very important to understand that defense tech and defense armament, that is not only for primaries or for somebody very selected. And I think that a lot of startup teams and a lot of really innovation teams, they are able to deliver and to give some really great innovation results and great innovation impact to their our resilience. And second thing, just having this opportunity, I invite everybody to join our big innovations forum, Defense Tech Innovations Forum, that will take place next week in Kyiv on February 18th and 19th. I know that hopefully a lot of you will be there to come. We have a conference and we have Expo Day, and that is definitely the place to attend and to be, because it would be very, I would say, practical things to know, to deep in, and to be a part of our defense innovations. Thank you.
Here you go.
Wow, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
No more comments from anyone else.